Chapter 5,
Yeah.
War. What is it good for?
My goodness. Yes. Absolutely nothing.
Thanks. Good God, y'all.
Yeah. We're gonna do war, and then we're gonna do
The first?
I mean,
I only
guess
got through the first attempt.
Okay, I got through the second
Nice.
attempt. No big deal.
Well, because
I was pretty
I
into it,
went I went back and read Chapter 4, The Planned Economy, which was kind of a long one.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, so happy to sort of be re-edified about that because of course, it's been a week. I've already forgotten everything. No,
The first attempt was cool, though. That was a very it's very
Yes.
in line with a lot of things I've thought about those particular parts of the Old Testament. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah. So I guess so we're doing Rose Wilder Lane's book, The Discovery of Freedom. I'll just say that at the front again, so that nobody's confused.
second
here.
episode 9.2.
Second episode. Everybody should be on board at this point.
Yeah. And by on board, I mean completely agreeing with everything we're saying.
Well, yeah.
Because I think we completely agree with each other 100%.
Oh, yes, as is evidenced by our discussions. No, I mean, it's funny. I have been listening back to some of our discussions, and I I do feel like I was going a little bit hard on the devil's advocate stuff. Because honestly, I've said this a lot, is that inherently I agree with a lot of the ideas of anarchy. It's always comes back to the organization issue for me. She addresses this better than I think most people.
Yes.
But even it basically, for me, if I could sum this all up, it's like anarchy works optimally and is probably the best for people to be happy, but it always ends up resulting in shambles when you get a barbaric outsider that comes in and basically, a pagan outsider, as she might say.
Yeah.
This is sort of the thing that I feel like is the big difficulty of any sort of peace-bearing people,
Right.
and it's what always brings us back into barbarism is, and the second attempt. So, we're doing the first attempt, which is about Abraham, and then the second attempt's about Muhammad and peace be upon him, and 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 the whole Muslim nations that sort of sprung up after his death, and I mean, anyway, she sort of concludes, I think, not very well, that the reason that they basically fell back into their own barbarism is because of a lack of civil law, which I actually thought was kind of interesting for her to say, given what she said previously about sort of, but didn't really give any credence to well, she gave some credence to the fact, but she didn't mention like Genghis Khan or anything like that, or
Right. So do we want to start with war, or do we want to start with the first attempt?
We should start with war, but I sort of wanted to get all that out. Thank you.
So the war chapter I like a lot. It has got a lot of quotes in it that I just want to post everywhere all over the world.
Yes. Yes, agreed. It's very, very.
It kind of sparked a fight with my wife, though, because I don't think she agrees.
Yeah. Well, so do you want to summarize it and then go into that?
Yeah, I mean it's a little tough to summarize. I mean, I guess you can summarize it very simply, but the idea that war is an offshoot, or war is a natural offshoot of a government. Only governments make war, and all governments will make war, because what governments have, the only thing that governments are able to do is exercise power, and war is a way of governments to find a method to exercise ever-increasing amounts of power through the exercise of force and the expansion of their ability to exercise more force in the future, either through taking more territory or taking over more people or things like that. Or being able to rope in new parts of the economy to, fund them with, munitions and war technologies and things like that. And that essentially the only way to move out of the current system of governments engaging in war is for people to embrace the fact that they are not actually beholden to government decision making, and that the only decision making they are truly beholden to is their own individual decision making, because it wouldn't really make any sense for any particular individual to engage in war. And so if we all see ourselves as our own individual decision makers, we very probably would not start engaging in war.
Yeah, I think that was good. I think, that basically covers all the points. I just have a few sort of things I wrote that I can, well, basically just echoes this. Proper function of government is force, and the ultimate result is war. I think that's I think basically what you said. If men in government use the force that is government in an attempt to control human energy, one result is war for the reasons that you said. Government limits human energy. War is an outbreak against that. And then at the end, I just have written a quote of war caused by ancient pagan belief that authority must and should control individuals. Because it really does. I mean, that's her thesis, right? Is this? She's basically trying to build this argument that, as she goes on in the first attempt, that the first person to sort of realize that humans are free was Abraham, but most of humanity has been people thinking that they weren't free and that they were just one of a tribe, and then I of course conceptualize this as the consciousness argument, which we've sort of already talked about. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing as just if you're feeling like you're one of a group, you're not as conscious as an individual who sort of realizes that they have volition and will. And
I think from Lane's perspective, you are in a way consciously offloading your decision making or your consciousness in a way by not taking responsibility for your own decisions and your own actions. And that something like a government can try and exercise force, but ultimately the government will not be able to exercise force if, say, literally everybody just ignores them. Because then if everybody, including the police, ignores them, then they have nobody to even enforce it.
Right.
And then if everybody but the police, it's going to be too big of a problem for the police. It's this kind of thing that we are actually all deciding to submit.
Yeah, which I think is basically what we were going to talk about Reddit at the end, but I think that's why you got so much heat on Reddit. Because I think that's and this is what she talks about too, and she basically is making this point in the first attempt about this is her reason why she says people hate the Jews is because they're the first sort of group that really realized this and started evangelizing this in a sense of that, we are free to sort of take, do things for ourselves, and there is no authority. And this is I'm getting ahead of myself, but then when she gets to Jesus and, Jesus was, of course, rebelling against the priests and, saying like, look, none of these priests are actually the ones that can tell you. And it was Abraham that was basically gave this very revolutionary idea that it's not God that controls you like is thought in the pagan beliefs, right? It's not like the God of Valentine that's causing you to become in love with somebody and whatnot. Instead, it's that you have will and you're acting however, you want, but you're supposed to act in a way that is, true to correct in God's eyes. And so, of course, that gets into all sorts of things of what does that mean and whatnot. But I do agree that idea is a very revolutionary one, of the idea, just that switch of, are you just a automaton being controlled by the gods, or are you acting, or are your actions being judged by a god?
I like the story that she starts the chapter with. I'm kind of veering off a little bit because actually I like what you're saying.
No, it's okay.
I feel like it'd be good to kind of get back to it. But I feel like the story she starts the chapter with is sort of charming.
We're talking about war, right?
Her Albanian friend. But I thought it was a good insight, and the way she describes his understanding or his sort of realization as to why Americans, at least at that time, tended to be more anti-war in spirit.
Right.
I thought the way he framed it, the way she's quoting him as framing it, it was really good. So it's a story about how we're talking about the 40s. We're talking about a different time because I think things have changed a little bit, but
Yeah,
but
just a little
the
bit.
idea was that Americans tended to be culturally much more anti-war, and Europeans tended to be a lot more accepting of the idea of war, either being sent to war or the country going to war, things like that.
Yeah, here's a quote from that she's saying is attributed to him. The immortal value is the soul of a nation, and war regenerates the nation's soul.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Americans cannot see spiritual value. And but then she of course says the state, the authority controls all human beings, and then it goes on.
But his bit
to
about
say that
Americans being materialistic, I thought was
right.
I mean, it's insightful because it's a funny because we think of that word as being really bad, and materialistic bad. But the way that he describes it, meaning they focus on the value of life and property, which I think actually is a pretty American perspective. I mean, that's something that I think individual lives and individual property to me are very valuable. Versus the soul of the state or something like that as being, so from his perspective, more valuable than any individual life or any individual property. And then the American idea is, like Sally's life and her house is way more important than like the United States government.
Yeah, no, and I like that, they were talking about how, where was the point? It's like, it's also making the point of how we don't refer to the government as our father. We call him Uncle Sam, whereas, the fatherland.
I thought that was
a
pretty silly one because
I actually really thought that was an interesting, because it's true. I mean, it really is reflective of how we are a nation of immigrants. And of course, we're not going to call America the fatherland or the motherland.
It's still familial. It's just not that familial, it's like.
But that's the point, though, is that it's like, okay, because everybody's got that uncle there. You're like, all right,
buddy.
Okay, all right, buddy. I'll give you my money, but I ain't gonna be happy about it. No, I know it was funny, but I actually think it was an interesting insight. I'll be honest.
I don't know. I agree.
Or you're frozen.
Yeah,
you're frozen.
Can you hear me? All right, so you thought it was a good insight. I agree, it's a good insight. It's just, I think it's funny to think it's radically different when it's just, to me, it's just your dad's brother.
No, but
or your mom's
again,
brother.
I know, but it is, I don't know. I think it is just, again, it's like, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But cool. I've already said my piece on that, and it's more of just the point. Yeah, that. Sorry, I just had a text. Why am I checking my phone, Mr. Antushka? But I think we agree. And this idea, just again, getting back at that idea of an automaton, right? And this is how most people lived in what she calls the old world, right? This is the old world thinking. And she defines the old world sort of more precisely later to like the crux of the old world thinking, which is that things are not being made, everything has been made.
Right.
And you're just acting. It's like you're not supposed to be changing anything. Progress isn't a thing. And she makes this whole point about, like, Benjamin Franklin and stuff. And
the staticness of the universe, zero-sum situation where for somebody to make $1, somebody has to lose $1. You can't actually build wealth. You can just exchange it.
Which is actually very interesting because, I mean, we sort of come to that conclusion as a fundamental, law of thermodynamics, right?
Right.
It is sort of an insightful point in some context, but
unless
when
they're
it's
wrong
used,
about thermodynamics. But
that's true. Maybe they're
don't the quantum people say that thermodynamics is wrong?
Quantum people say everything.
Right.
Like,
they
like,
say exactly. That's
people?
True. They do say everything.
Yeah, it's like you find one quantum person that probably says it, and then another one says the opposite because it's like. It's weird, man.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Weird makes sense to me, though. Neat is the more surprising. It would be very surprising to me if the kind of sterile physics models were really true. Things like laws, they're so neat. And to me, existence is so messy.
Right. Well, this is always, I mean, we get back to that truth question. And for me, it's like all the truth that we're talking about is just its ability to predict things, to, you know, and
Right.
that's sort of what we subscribe as truth. But we can, you know, we don't have to get into that. But yeah, no. And I agree. Like I think I texted you, like, we should definitely read the war chapter because, the inevitable reaction to such a state of affairs is war. Too much energy is subtracted from productive energy. It's just this idea that government's always trying to limit the productive aspect of human energy.
Yep.
And then at a certain point, it hits a groundswell, and then you're going to get war. And I mean, yeah, it's like, look at what's happening now. I mean, it's a very controversial opinion for some reason, but it's like there is a part of me that feels like there's this war. Like, there's a lot of people that actually want to go to war because we've gotten to a point where so many people disagree on so many fundamental moral things.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, there's only one way out of this, and it's just we have to kill a bunch of people, and which is horrible, right? But it does seem to be a pattern.
Yep.
And it seems to be the only way to break out of this pattern is by sort of making everybody realize we are not automatons. We have will, every one of us, if we reach a certain threshold of consciousness. But again, I feel like the thing that keeps us away from that, and she sort of says this indirectly, but I am kind of trying to say it more directly, is as you lean into consciousness, you lean into the fear of death because you're inevitably going to think about that the more aware you are.
Right.
And I think that's what keeps a lot of people in sort of the animal slumber of just like, it's security, you know?
Right. It's crazy.
It's this, yeah.
It's one of those weird things where war is security.
Right. But actually, I was just listening to Bassem Youssef and Piers Morgan. They've been having these very sort of popular interviews on YouTube.
I know who that is. I know who Piers Morgan is. I don't know.
Bassem Youssef, he's like been compared to the Jon Stewart of like Egyptian comedy. He came up after the Arab Spring. He was actually a heart surgeon.
Oh,
Very
wait a minute.
interesting.
I do know who this is.
I'm sure
Yes,
you
yes,
know
yes.
him. Yeah. He sort of sprung up in, I feel like, American, because he went on Jon Stewart's back in like as Jon Stewart was ending his show in like 2015. That's when I first heard about him.
That's right.
But yeah, he was basically kind of saying the same thing because, you know, what happened after the Arab Spring is al-Sisi came into power, and he was basically, you know, people have called him a military dictator. I'm just saying that I don't honestly know enough about all of this, but I'm just, you know, so sorry if anybody's listening is like, but it does, you know, this is also what Bassem Youssef has said, who lived there. And he was just saying how, you know, it became harder to satirize the government and also get people on their side because it's just they chose the security of the strong man, right? And yeah, so it does. And what is the strong man? It's like, I'm going to take care of you. You don't have to worry about your own stuff. Give me the power, and I'll deal with it. And yeah, it's a nice short-term solution, but in the long term, it always leads to bad, you know, whether it's starvation because, you know, they're like, okay, well, we're going to take all this food from here, from the productive people, and we're going to give it to other people who aren't necessarily unproductive, right, but have been maybe convinced that they're unproductive is sort of the idea. There's so many interesting points. I honestly will say, though, I did have more, she was really like convincing me, and then the second attempt chapter was a little bit, I had more issues with that, but I think still on the whole, I agree with a lot of what she's saying.
Sure.
We can get to that.
Well, so there's a passage at the end of the war chapter that I actually thought was great because also it's interesting after we read about Machiavelli, because I remember just a little bit that we read about talking about how you can't live in peace with a previously occupied people. The only option is to completely annihilate them.
Well, there's two options. You completely annihilate them or you assimilate them.
Oh, okay, right. But they can't live as they were.
Second-class citizens.
Right.
You need to give them citizenship and full rights and everything like that.
Right.
Or else there's going to be a resentment that builds up and it's just, yeah.
Right. So the idea that annihilation is an option, it's interesting because Lane actually addresses that particular option,
Right.
saying that it actually doesn't end up ending any problems.
No.
So she's posing a hypothetical situation of Missouri being at war with Kansas.
Right.
Right. So
No, I don't even think it was hypothetical.
no,
I feel
that
like
it could have happened, but there was never a war. There's never been some like permanent military fighting between military.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but she was making the point that there was,
Yeah.
Historically,
there is
different
historical animosity, but there has never been
people.
state-run war between Missouri and Kansas.
It's interesting you want to read that. Is it at the end of page 69? Because I had that.
Yep.
This also. Wow, I had that exact thing starred, and so
Nice.
go ahead.
All right, so it's this proposed war. Both Missourians and Kansans are good fighters. They would fight that war to a standstill and resume it again and again until it might seem that the only way to end it would be to crush Missourians utterly or to smash every Kansan beyond possibility of recovery. This solution might seem necessary if you did not know that utterly crushing the enemy has always been the method used to end war. For 6,000 years, that method has been ending war. It does not end war because war is not caused by the enemy. War is caused by the ancient pagan belief that authority controls individuals and must and should control them. This belief is in individual minds, and no force whatever can change any man's mind. War will end when a majority of men on this earth know that every man is free. Each person must see for himself that everyone is self-controlling and responsible.
Yeah, and what is that? I mean, it's in some sense the golden rule.
Right.
And yeah, she goes on that idea of brotherhood, or a lot of just seeing other people as brothers and sisters. Yeah, no, that's good.
What's interesting is it's very powerful to me. But
yeah, well,
when I showed it to my wife, she thought it was gobbledygook. And
really?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So what was her opinion on it?
That it's ridiculous to think that everybody will just believe one thing.
Well,
like, i.e., that everybody will
know.
accept that individual responsibility is the way to live your life.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's basically I think that she's right in being, in thinking that because because that's exactly what I would say Rose Wilder Lane is making the point that every time somebody tries to push this, it can lead to great wealth and opportunity if a nation does embrace it. And she gives examples of it, like America, like Spain before the Inquisition, like the Saracen, like the Muslim empires, which she's calling the Saracens. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah, the Saracen civilizations, right, which were basically the Muslim empires that sprung up after Muhammad. And like, I guess you would say the Jewish religion. I mean, this is probably why they've been so successful too.
Pre-Solomon and the kings.
True, but I would honestly argue that this idea of embracing individuality is a central tenet of Judaism. I'm not Jewish, but I so what do I actually know? But I have grew up with a lot of Jewish friends, honestly, and I was Christian, right? Brought up Presbyterian, and I work with a lot of Jewish people, and I just see that it's just a work ethic thing, which I sort of attribute to individuality, because it's this idea that nobody's going to do the thing for you, right?
Sure.
You have to go out and do it. And obviously, I guess somebody could say, well, what do you mean? Like, of course, they call it the tribe and stuff. So obviously they think of themselves as a group. But again, it's this group that, of individuals in some sense.
Right.
Yeah. I thought this was a great chapter to read because of everything that's going on, because it really is. She's trying to sort of link the thread between the Abrahamic religions of, you know, of Christianity and Islam and Judaism as all fundamentally having this idea of there's one God, of course, but it's a God that is not controlling you. You are controlling yourself, and you are supposed to be doing right. But you have the will, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say that is, I mean, that's how I always looked at Christianity and the good parts of it.
Right.
And because, you know, I was Protestant, and I think that was a big thing that the Protestant Reformation was rebelling against, was this idea that you had this outside authority in the Catholic Church that was telling you, you know, you have to, if you're going to get to God, you have to go through us. And then, you know, of course.
Yeah, like, oh, we'll talk to God.
Yeah, it's like, hey, hang on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, what's also interesting in the Israel-Palestine conflict is the rhetoric around either side, whatever anybody's perspective is to remove agency from the actors. Is that whoever has been hit by some attack has in some way chosen, and the person who's done the attack has no agency for that attack.
Right.
And that seems to be the rhetoric all around for this entire conflict.
Right.
That none of the attacks are anybody's fault.
I know. Which is why I think most of the sane people around the world are calling for a ceasefire, you know?
Right. But like I have friends and family members that are like, if you call for a ceasefire, fuck you. We're not friends anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
whoa.
You know.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. But it's just like, okay, so what, do you want to have like a 21st century crusade? It's like, you know, I got Norwegian ancestors. We made that mistake 1,000 years ago. It's like, I'm not making that mistake again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
It's
crazy.
Yep.
And this is honestly, like, I was like also kind of debating whether to talk about this because it is so hyperbolic, and we obviously don't really know enough about the situation, but I would argue we know enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like we know enough to say it's like, you know, everybody should stop killing each other.
No, I agree. I mean,
Easier
I have
said
this
than
thing.
done.
To me, war is like one of the most tragic, worst things that exists in the human world. And I don't know if it's the worst, but it's way up there.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And like, I don't like thinking about what it means to bomb people. It's just, we've talked about it before. It's just insane.
Right. And now, you know, we can watch it on social media. It's like I was just on Twitter, AKA X. Yeah. And just watching, like, you know, whether it's Palestinian, all the rubble of, you know, of Gaza, or it's watching a drone basically drop a grenade on a group of IDF soldiers.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so it's, you know, but this is why I actually found like the Bassem Youssef interview so compelling, and it's also been very popular. And I think which is the reason other people are, because it's like everybody, every sane person, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're an atheist, whether they're an anarchist,
Right.
understands that the extremists on all sides have gotten the control. They are the ones that are running the show on all sides around the world right now.
Right.
And it's like, if us moderates continue to keep our mouths shut, then we will be led like lambs to the slaughter on all sides. And that's just the way it's unfortunately going to be if we don't say things. So thank goodness we have a podcast with 20 listeners.
Yeah.
We're going to ruin our careers over that.
It's
But,
so
you know,
silly.
it is.
Ruining our careers.
It
People
is.
are so mad.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, it's tough, though, because it's like you and I don't have we don't have family members being directly affected by this. So we're not emotionally charged about this. Well, maybe you do. I shouldn't speak for you. I don't.
My wife's parents, beep. My wife's parents got caught in Israel like a month ago.
Wow.
They were there
Wait.
when the first attack happened.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. They couldn't leave. The airport was shut down. They had to cross the border into Jordan by land to fly out of
Wow.
Amman to get to Paris.
Wow. I didn't know that.
That was
Jeez.
crazy.
That is crazy. Also, I can't believe that was like a month ago.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, we're coming up on November 7th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the more we get involved, anyway, we're just talking about this now. We're not talking about the book anymore. We should probably get back to the book. But yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the next part of the book is almost less challenging. Maybe it's more challenging. I don't know. But
yeah. So I mean, I agree. It's pretty simple in that she's just basically saying like the first. So she calls it the first attempt, and it's the idea of the first attempt. Excuse me, was Abraham.
Right.
He was, at least credited with the first idea that we humans are free, and started evangelizing that, which led to the Judaic and
right.
Abrahamic
I think there's a few really important points. So the first attempt I would summarize as the history of the creation of Israel and what the Jewish religion, what the revolution of the Jewish religion was as opposed to previous religions.
Yes, and that they were anarchists.
Right. Well, they started off that way. Yep.
Yeah, so on page 78, they wanted to be like all the other nations, but to be like any other people, they must forget that men are free. That is the truth that they held. Therefore, of course, they were anarchists.
Right.
They lived and prospered for centuries with no government, whatever.
Right. So they make a big point about this in the Old Testament, actually, because they talk about Gideon, and they talk about trying to make him king, and he won't accept being king. And eventually, they petition. I mean, she talks about it. They petition eventually. They get all the way to Samuel, and they're like, "We need a king." And Samuel's like, "No, you don't. Stop it. Like, you don't want a king. A king's not going to make it any better. It's going to make life way worse." And they're like, "No, we need it." And he's like, "Okay." And so then God grants them a king grudgingly.
Right.
Because Samuel talks to the big guy, and God's like, "Okay,
yeah,
you asked for it."
Right. Yeah. No, and then she makes that point with Moses too, right? Because I mean, she was making this is where one of my pushbacks with a lot of this, and then the second attempt chapters were she's making a lot of claims about history. I would have liked more citations, but I get it. It's
her story is biblically sound.
No. That, but when she goes on in the second attempt, I felt that more. So I agree. I felt that less in this one, but more in the other one. When also she's talking about things that are not as long back in history, right? Obviously, it's like how much can we really know about 4,000 years ago?
I mean, I don't even know if this Bible story is true, but her telling of it is true to the Bible as far as I can tell. I think an interesting point she makes is about the Ten Commandments, because there's these various sort of attempts to placate the Israelites in their desire to be ruled. And it's interesting, of all people, Jordan B. Peterson. He has an interesting bit on the Exodus from Egypt, because the idea of how does a people deal with being freed from slavery, finding freedom, and they're lost, right? They're lost in the wilderness for years, decades, right? They're just wandering around the desert.
Allegedly. But yeah, just kidding.
It's like Jim Gaffigan has that great joke about how after a couple months he would have been like, I don't think this Moses guy knows where he's going.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, so they're just wandering around the desert. They're completely lost, and then they try and set up a civilization, and they just keep setting up new idols and new gods, and they need this ruling. And so they get the Ten Commandments eventually, because this is the pre-king thing. They need something, and what God gives them, as Lane talks about, is a series of negations. It's not even a lot of rules about do this, do this, do this. It's mostly don't do this, don't do this, don't do this.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah, and you know what's interesting? Have you heard of Socrates' Daemon?
Yeah, I don't remember what it is.
Well, he has this quote of like, basically it's based, I think of it as he's talking about his conscience. And right, so of course Socrates was what, 400 BCE or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But at his trial, you know, people are asking him about like, why are you doing this? And he's like, well, I just, for some reason at some point had this oracle that started telling me things, but it never told me what to do. It only told me what not to do. I thought that was very interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yes. And you know, this is where it's like, it's important to start looking at, I think, all of these sort of philosophies, Judaic, Greek, Hellenic, you know, Christianic, whatever, as they all have this idea of personal freedom. I think they are all getting at this in the most uncorrupted sense. I would say, before they get corrupted by practitioners and whatnot.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a very interesting point about Moses and the Ten Commandments. And yeah, he goes on she goes on rather in the second. Wow, how could I? She goes on in the second part, in the second attempt.
That just hit me how silly that was.
Yeah. She goes on in the second attempt, and you know, it's talking about Muhammad too. And maybe I shouldn't get. Well, I won't get ahead. We'll get to Muhammad.
Well, because I think her point about Christ also is important.
Yes. Well, and I just thought this was interesting because she basically has a reason. She has a reason for why the world hates the Jews. I thought might be kind of interesting to read.
Sure.
On page 79, with reason, the old world hates the Jews. 4,000 years ago, a Jew said that men are free. 2,000 years ago, a Jew preached that men are free. In medieval Europe, the Jews came from Spain knowing that men are free. That knowledge will destroy the whole old world concept of the universe and of man. It will break up the foundation of the old world nations and states and shatter the very basis of their subjects' lives.
Yep.
Yeah. So they are afraid of the Jew.
Right.
They ward him off. They shut him out. They build walls around him. Yes.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, and she talks about Jesus also in that line, or along those lines, about, you know, how he came with the sword, right? Jesus actually comes to destroy the nations.
Yes.
Right. He's a destructive force. He's not he's a uniting force, yes, but he's not there with candies and everything. He's there to destroy the old systems.
Right. And getting, you know,
he
maybe
also
you're
destroys the Old Testament. I mean, he is the fulfillment of the old covenant, and he is the new covenant.
Yeah, and maybe you're getting at just the point I think I made of how, yeah, like, you know, he's telling them don't listen to the priests. They're, you know, just because they say that they know the way doesn't mean they know the way, and you know, don't listen to Rome. There's only one judgment, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that is a very powerful idea.
Yeah.
And really is what sets out. I mean, it's true. It's like this sets the Jewish Abrahamic faiths different from basically every other religious faith that has sprung up that we at least have record of, right?
Right.
You know. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, it's revolutionary. It's this whole thing. I'm glad that she wrote this, and it's a little bit confirmation bias, but it's thoughts that I've had about the Jesus story for a long time, that Jesus feels like a radical individualist to me. You know, people say Jesus was a socialist and all that, and everybody can read everybody has their own interpretations of stories, obviously.
Right.
But he really feels like a radical individualist in a lot of ways, because salvation is your own, and your salvation is also your responsibility.
Right. Right.
So
yeah,
to me, it's the most white-pilled idea of all time, because you don't have to rely on anybody else. It's actually easier
What is a white pill again? I hate all these pill analogies. God, the Matrix really did a number on our psyche.
It's just that there's hope.
Okay.
I mean, to me, you need hope. Hope is the most important thing that there is. I think.
Hope is dopamine.
Right. Otherwise, why would you do anything?
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Is there? Are
It's
there
actually
any other...
it's part of what really bothers me with a lot of the arguments that my ideas are unrealistic, or the negation, it's inevitable that they can't happen or something like that. Is to me it's so. I feel like it's attempting to deny my hope, and it's what we talked about before. To me, it's a very different statement to say, no, I don't want that. I don't want the kingdom destroyed. I like the kingdom. Mm-hmm. That's a very different statement than the kingdom is inevitable.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I guess one is the negation of my perspective, and the other is just a statement of disagreement.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, saying the kingdom is inevitable is saying that what I'm saying has no meaning, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, it's a determinist.
Right. It's like, there's nothing meaningful about what you're saying, which is annoying.
Yeah. And it's funny because, I remember when COVID first started, everybody was just saying, like, just focus on the things that you can control. There's so much out of your control. But yeah, it's sort of the same idea. It's this kind of a determinist mentality of like, there's not really a lot that you can do to affect the world around you. So, I mean, granted, there was that, I was saying sliver a lot last episode. I don't know why.
Were you?
I was. I always sort of get caught in these like word loops. So I'm going to try not to say it. But what's the analogy? What's similar to simulate a sliver? But a
splinter.
Yeah, a quanta. There's this quanta of obviously control in that statement, but it's still, I think, overly sort of pessimistic about your ability to affect the world around you. And I guess the point I'm making is it gets back to this idea that for some reason, I think I know the reason, I've already said, because I think as you lean into consciousness, which is control, ultimately that is the control. That's the realization that you have control. You also realize that you're going to die and that you really have no control over that.
Right. Unless you're one of the weird people who think you might.
Yeah, but everybody will come to that
I guess
realization.
The Christian story is that you do have control over that you actually have control and you cannot die.
Sure. I mean, I get it. I would say it's a rationalization in some sense, but yeah. And again, for all I know, like I all I'm saying is that we die and I don't know what happens after that. Right? I have
and we
suspicions.
go to heaven at the age of 32, and there's buses, and the angels drive buses.
I thought he was 33.
Probably,
was he 32?
Fine, 33. Sure.
Because I think it was like he was 30, and then it was 3 years.
I would think it's 32, but I think 33 is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was Presbyterian, okay? So, like,
okay.
Yeah. No, but I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't know. I mean, I know you didn't read the second attempt, but I think there are some. I mean, were you wanting to read it for next time, or do you want me to sort of summarize?
If you want to go into it, I might try and read it for next time. It's not super.
Yeah.
long. The last one's pretty long.
I was going to say, because I do think we should do
I don't
as
know
much
if
of
I'll
the
get
third.
through the whole thing, but I'll try.
Yeah, I think we should do as much of the third attempt as we can.
And then we'll do the fourth attempt.
We are doing the fourth attempt as we speak.
Oh, that's what this podcast should be called. The fourth
There we
attempt.
go. The fourth
That's way
attempt.
better than plausible deniability AMX.
How dare you? How dare you? Plausible deniability AMX is the best title ever conceived.
Oh,
No,
right.
just
I
kidding.
always forget that.
Yes. Come on. So at the top, I have this written in the second attempt. Muhammad also preached individual supremacy. that organization is evil and that priests corrupt the message. Because, it starts by talking about how he lived in Mecca for many years.
Right.
And ultimately he was driven out of Mecca because he was talking about this, again, that, the priests, he was doing the same thing Jesus was doing, right? Is that the priests are not the ones that are going to tell you how to get to heaven or save your soul or whatever. It's you. You're ultimately the one in charge of that. And, of course, the priest didn't like that. And so then he gets driven out. And so a lot of this is honestly more of just the story of that. But making similar points about, people wanted Muhammad to tell them, like, what are we supposed to do? And he was like, he's kind of begrudging to tell them that. And ultimately he did put out some rules, but, and this is where I haven't read the Quran, so I don't know how, true this is, but she's sort of making it appear like, yes, he did say certain things about, like, how many wives you're supposed to have and stuff, but he also more generally said, like, that you shouldn't, like, basically you shouldn't have a lot because, it's a lot to handle.
Right.
It distracts. He said that it'll distract men.
That's a pretty funny way to put it. Like, all of a sudden, Rose Lane's like, it's just a lot of ladies, okay?
Well, they were saying that it would distract you from business, because he was a businessman. I don't know. I'm making no.
I don't know.
I have no idea.
You're like, business here, 8 women over there.
Actually, it was 4. Apparently, he said 4 was the number that you should have no more than that. But again, I don't know anything about this. But she kept making this point about organization too, right? Going back to this idea, because her point, I think, is that we're going to organize, but she made this I said point, taking it too many times, but she made this point in, I think, the planned economies chapter, where it's like, or maybe it was a communist chapter, where it's like organization is inherently going to waste human energy, but if it's not kept through force, it will reach a natural plateau.
Right, there's a mechanism that will fight against it, the law of diminishing returns.
Right.
Yep.
So she was making this point of how, when Muhammad was living and then in the years after his death, it's like a lot of the Islamic society was sort of anarchic in that it's just people. There wasn't a lot of central authorities telling people what to do. It was more, if you wanted to make a mosque, it was like the group would go and make the mosque and stuff. This is where I just don't know enough about all this. She lived apparently in like outside of Syria and Iraq. I lived for some years in the remnants of the Turkish Empire and in Syria and Iraq. I looked for traces. Yeah, so because she's then also telling like why did the empires fall eventually, and that's where I said, she says it's because there was no civil laws. And I guess maybe she's getting at the idea that they didn't have like a 10 Commandments type thing, which I don't even like. I thought that they, have something like there's obviously laws that I've already said about, bathing regularly and praying regularly and stuff like that. But
because she does address that with the Jewish community, that there were communal ways of dealing with like lawbreakers and stuff like that were sort of fast. And what she doesn't say, and what I would wonder is, or my guess is, probably fairly inaccurate. But that isn't to say that I don't know if they would be more or less inaccurate than systems we have today. It's not like our system of law is very good in terms of catching and punishing, bad people.
Yeah, and she sort of makes that point about how they would sort of solve those things in the Saracen civilizations, as she called them, where, it's like if you had a bunch of people or if you had 2 people that started fighting in like a market, the group would then separate these people, and then you would bring those people to a wise person who would
Right.
listen to each side and then decide what to do.
Nice. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you know, and in some sense, it's interesting because the internet is kind of doing this in a sense. It is bringing back the idea of public shame because you see all
Right.
these videos, these horrible videos, but then you also see the aftermath of what happens to these people that are involved in these videos. And I do wonder, it's just like maybe this is sort of one good thing about the internet is potentially, because I do think shame is sort of the way that we've governed ourselves for many years. It's the idea that, you know, you don't want to bring dishonor to your family, and it's this strong impulse that we have as humans to fit in and not be ostracized.
Right.
Which
think
of course
there's a-
can be taken too far, obviously, to groupthink.
I feel like the problem. I mean, there's no perfect system. There's a good old Thomas Sowell. There's no. I think I said it. last time.
We've said that before.
No-
Everybody
no
quotes that.
solutions
I don't
are
know.
the only trade-off. I mean, it's pretty good.
It's
handy.
a good one. Yeah, it's handy.
There's actually a Thomas Sowell book I think we should read.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Which one?
It's about experts.
Yeah,
And,
I'd be down for that.
I mean, it's essentially about how the elite classes and the expert classes are sort of trusted, but they're not actually. If you look into them, they're not even more correct than sort of the unwashed masses.
Yeah,
We just think that they
they're-
are.
Yeah, they're better with rhetoric.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a funny idea. It's kind of a radical
Yeah.
idea that, you know, like a professor of history doesn't even know more about history than other people.
Yeah, no, but I agree, and yeah, and yes, she's not so much making that groupthink idea or the shame point. That's just something I was thinking about, you know. But yeah, I think ultimately she's just showing how the Saracens had a lot of these same
Right.
ideas of individualism, and she's attributing that to all of the great inventions that they made, right? The Arabic Golden Age. And so she also spends a lot of that chapter just talking about all the things that we owe to them, you know, whether it's just algebra, right? Arabic numerals,
Right.
I guess the sofa, right? She had just a bunch of Arabic words that we still use that, you know, and just all the great crafts and then you know, she was attributing the first hospitals and medical schools to them, which I don't completely agree, but you know, I'm not saying that
I've
they
heard
didn't
that
attribute,
before.
right?
I've heard that narrative.
Yeah, but medical school, it's like, what about Hippocrates? It's like, what would you call what they were doing, but a medical school, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, but yes, but it's not to say that they weren't. You know, they were basically doing everything that England. Why did I say England? Freudian slip. I don't know. That Europe. You know, she was just pointing out the absurdity of saying like Europe remembered science is the Renaissance, right? And Italy like rediscovered science from the Greeks, but it's like actually what probably happened was they just got the transfer of knowledge after the fall of the Saracen civilizations, and as people moved into Europe with the knowledge, whether they were Jewish, Arabic-speaking Jews, or just
I mean, there's probably truth to that. It seems unlikely that the story is just all Europe all the time.
yes, exactly, yes. And I think we have a better appreciation for this now than probably when Rose Wilder Lane was writing in the 40s. But still, it's just a good thing to remember. I sort of didn't like how much it's the same. But I said, I guess the point that I kept coming back to, and again, I'm not saying that I disagree with the idea that individualism doesn't lead to sort of the most flourishing economies if it can be grasped correctly. But it's that problem that every, you could say, civilization has when it reaches its peak of, at some point, a more hardened people comes in and destroys them, you know? And it's just, how do we reconcile that, I guess, is the question. And I'm not saying we're going to answer that right now.
Yeah.
I guess, it's a well-armed people, I suppose.
Right. Being for the, what's the Second Amendment? Being necessary for the maintenance of a free people. You need a well-armed militia.
Right. But it's just, I mean, she even makes this point of how militias can become police force, which then become tyranny. And, you know, so I guess it's just, but I guess her point would be, well, yeah, it's just you have to constantly fight against
people
that
who are willing to take on the responsibility of being free, independent people. Right.
So I guess it's just remembering constantly that you are free and you are, and, you know, she says this is essentially what she thinks that Muhammad was trying to get people to do when they repeat during their prayers, like, there is one God, right? And it's this idea that there's one God, but also that you are being judged and you have will. So, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, and then she ends it by talking about how, specifically in Spain, right, you had the fall of the Saracen Empire in Spain and the rise of Catholicism.
Yes.
And basically in 3 generations, Spain became a backwater. But interestingly, the energy of the Saracen people, she's attributing to basically going out and forging the New World. I mean, they were the first ones to go and discover, quote, discover, right, the Americas. And yeah, so, and then, of course, that leads us to the third attempt, which we'll read next time, which is specifically talking about America.
Also, I thought I had all that old classical guitar music we used to play from Spain is all hearkening back to those old cultural periods, pre-Catholics taking over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the guitar. It's like, where'd the guitar come from?
Right. The Alhambra.
Yeah, the sitar, obviously. I mean, this is the other interesting thing, because it's true. You know, I said, like, Judaism is like one of the only sort of religions to really embrace this individualism, which I think is true to an extent, but it is just also interesting how much Far East influence there is in, you know, like the Vedas has a lot of similarities to one of the Vedas. You can read it, and then you read Genesis and you're like, wow, this is like very similar. And of course, you know, she brings up the concept of zero as coming from the Saracen empires, but I think now a lot of Indians would argue that they were the first ones to sort of conceive it, and then it just passed through them. And this is kind of the other thing that I wanted to push back when I was reading it, is just, I felt like she was almost being too, like, she was definitely making her case for why the Saracens were a great civilization, but also, like, you know, she didn't talk about any of the bad that they did. And it's like, everybody has bad stuff. And it's like, you know, it's like, why did the Europeans need to feel like they had to, you know, go around the Horn of Africa to trade? Because it's like, we kept getting ripped off.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, okay.
That's true.
So
I think there's a lot of stuff like that. I think also I get a little annoyed with people being obsessed with firsts. The first attempt. I mean, I feel like the problem is there's no way you can know enough history to know if it's the first.
Exactly. Where did Abraham got this from somewher?
Probably.
And we've just forgotten. Maybe it was, you know, the Anunnaki. We're just throwing words out, you know.
But this brings us to Reddit. But this was like one of the main arguments I was having on Reddit, which was driving me crazy, about the idea of the original idea of the term libertarian or something like that, which to me is a completely worthless thought.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, I didn't really understand that person's point. But yeah, it's interesting, because I asked you, so yeah, you posted as you sort of normally do, and this was, I think, one of the more contentious ones.
Yeah. I mean, that could be an interesting conversation too, as to why are these ideas that she's bringing up so challenging? Why are people so upset by them?
Yeah, I think it has to do with that thing that I cut out in the last episode.
But I think
be
it's more
perfectly
than
honest.
that, actually.
Yeah.
Did you
think
cut it
so?
out?
I did cut it out, yeah.
You will never know.
And I think there was somebody who was also talking to you, and I feel like they were trying to get you to say that, actually.
Were they?
Yeah. Because, like, what's the implication of this? I thought you answered very well, though. Is the implication of this is the idea that just every time an authority tries to convince its people that, put your will into me and I will do good by you,
Right.
that always ends up bad.
Right.
And the only time, like, if you want to look at people who have flourished, it's the people who have realized that they have volition and
Right.
will, and they are able to actualize
Right.
their environment.
Well, because this is what I notice when I bring it up. Most people are trying to pull the conversation to the most like gruesome, horrific
Right.
possible. Like if you like put a gun in somebody's mouth, like that kind of like something crazy, and it's like, well, of course somebody's going to submit in that situation. I
Right.
I can't think of anybody who I've ever read who would argue that like that isn't a bad situation, or that person is in the best capacity to make the most well-informed decision of their life.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with it. The other thing is, I actually see Lane's perspective as a very optimistic one. The white pill, black pill thing. The reason I like individualist ideology, and it's kind of like how she describes Judaism and Christianity and Jesus, and I haven't read the second attempt, so I haven't read enough about how she's describing Muhammad in that sort of area of things. But actually, to me, it's all very optimistic. And like we were saying before, death is an inevitability. Even the Christians are saying, no, it's not. You can even conquer death, which maybe is crazy, but it's like super optimistic. Because the one thing that we fear the most is that that's not even a problem.
Right. And it's
And so
interesting
to
because
me, it's a message of hope. And it's interesting, the attempt to drag it into the darkest possible place.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think it's because it reminds people, like if you remind them that they have more will than they potentially think, then all of a sudden things that are going bad in their life could be their fault, right?
Right, but
And
then they
it's
can
hard
also
to
get
face
better.
that.
I know. That's the other
but
side of it. Is like,
I know.
it's your life,
Right.
and ultimately, like, I'm not mad at you if you're doing things that
Right.
are making your life worse.
Right. So what did you think about sort of my wrinkle,
yeah.
though?
We'll talk about that.
Because this is it. It's like, to a degree, I agree. Because ultimately, I was trying to summarize her point as she's basically saying nobody from a physiological standpoint has the ability to actualize your muscles. It's like only you can send the neurological
I'm not sure that's
input.
what she's saying.
Well, yeah. I mean, what else? I mean, how else do you think she means when she says nobody can
Maybe
harness
she is
your
saying
energy?
that. I think that there's a better way to come at it, though, because I think that it's more than actualizing your muscles. I think it's what I was talking about, the whole ghost in the machine thing. And I think her use of energy is confusing for that reason. And so maybe she does mean literally actualize your muscles. But I think if you can send a voltage through somebody's brain that causes, their arm to move or something, or causes them to speak a word or anything, any kind of physical process, I'm not sure that I would count that as action. I would count it as motion. But I don't equate motion and action necessarily.
Well, and that's okay. I mean, so this is, I guess, what we're getting into. Because I was then saying, okay, so then you have deep brain stimulation, right?
Right.
Which sort of goes against what I just said of how nobody actually has the ability to actualize your muscles, only you do.
Right.
But of course, if you put a microchip in somebody's brain in the right location, you can cause an electrical stimulation to do that. So I agree. What she's getting at is consciousness, but I've already sort of said in my conception of consciousness, it comes out of the interconnectivity of the brain, which is because I'm materialist in this setting.
Right.
It's like, and I don't think that devalues it. It's like I'm not saying that there's not sort of a fascinating aspect to it, but it is this idea that it is potentially hackable, and I think this is seen in the fact that then you have diseases such as Wernicke-Korsakoff's, where when you have degradation of the mammillary bodies in the brain over many years of drinking, you lose your ability to make interrograde memories, meaning you can no longer consolidate new memories. And in some cases, you also lose a lot of old memories. So you become this very interesting person. And Oliver Sacks talks about this in Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, where you are basically living in the present. And it's this question of, are you conscious? And so I'm just getting at this point of, that's a very sort of, for me, showing that consciousness is...
Right. You can degrade the physical body, and that interrupts levels
consciousness. Yes. Yes, or Alzheimer's. Take any of your sort of dementia examples, right? And, well, okay, so we could agree that maybe you were just saying the ghost is leaving and going somewhere else. I'm fine to accept that. But the point is that we're more hackable than we realized. And then it's not to necessarily discredit it, but it's to say that consciousness, I think, should be looked at as this great distance of information, which is what allows us to sort of reflect, because it's just a shorter path that the information's going when you're actualizing your muscles. But when you're actualizing sort of your muscles after sort of doing a bunch of you know, numerical calculations in your brain or whatever calculations, then that's what consciousness is. And that is much more difficult to hack, I guess, is what I'm trying to ultimately get to, because there's more convolutions involved. And so how do you...
Like Elon Musk's child's name is very difficult to hack.
What's that? What's his name?
When you said difficult to hack, it made me think of a stupid... Remember Elon Musk had a kid, and they said the name was like XE $pound.
Oh, I don't remember that now.
Oh, yeah. The kid's name is like a password.
Jesus.
But he made a joke. He was like, it's a very difficult name to hack.
That's funny. Yeah. No, but I don't know if this is making sense, but this is why I'm saying...
It makes sense. I think the degrading point makes the most sense. To me, the deep brain stimulation isn't necessarily different in kind than grabbing somebody's arm and pulling it.
No, but I mean, I'm agreeing with you. That's the point. Is I'm sort of working through this of like I'm contradicting myself, but then I'm rebutting it. So it's like I came up and said, okay, so I think she's talking about energy and the ability to actually actualize action, because that's really what you are doing. You say that, okay, it's more than that. I agree, but it's this idea that you have this orb, we'll call consciousness, and then you're actualizing your muscles.
I think it's actualizing with intent. I think
yes, but that's what consciousness is. That's we're saying the same thing. Sorry,
okay. That's okay.
Sorry, I'm just trying to iterate the fact that I think I am agreeing with you. It's that the short path is different than the convoluted path. Though they are both hackable, the convoluted path is more difficult to hack, and we haven't really. Maybe it's unhackable because we haven't figured it out. But it's hackable to the extent that if you cut enough connections, you lose it and whatnot, you know, as evidenced by the mammillary body sort of stuff and whatnot. And Alzheimer's
But I think that's
disease.
similar to if you kill somebody, they can no longer act.
Well, it's similar, but it's less finite because you're still alive. And that's the point. It's showing how we can regress back into our animal state if we lose enough neurologic connections.
Right.
And so all I'm saying is that I think I agree with Rose Wilder Lane, but it's also interesting because there are examples where, I mean, this is the thing is there's levels to consciousness. But
I think that the challenge here, what I find challenging, and not that I disagree, I actually think I agree with what you're saying, and I find it's difficult to fit it in, which isn't a bad thing. The idea that that your ability to act, your consciousness is this sort of irrevocable trait, God-given trait, something like that, right? That it may not be that. It may just be the happenstance of your physiology that it both like degrades the entire. To me, it starts to dismantle the entire system, where it makes it feel like maybe you aren't actually acting, because if it is just a conglomeration of neurons, then that is just a happenstance of your physiology. And so it isn't this kind of like magical ghost in the machine system. It just feels that way. And, determinism is true, at which point nothing matters. Like if full determinism is true, then I see no point in anything. Like, you're just going to run out. Like, it's not that we won't have this conversation. We will, but we're not choosing. It's just we're just running out of clock.
No, it's just, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, it seems like a subunit of it is distance traveled for the information. And just because it can be brought down to that level doesn't mean that it doesn't create a really complex process that is able to break out of a determinist state.
I think it's more than distance traveled. So, like, I don't buy
That's fine.
The AI
you don't have
thing.
a good, you haven't, but yeah, but like, you think, but this is my issue though with metaphysics. It's like nobody's actually trying to think about what is actually happening in the bodies. And sorry,
no, I think it's fine. But when we talk about actually happening in the body, I think that's a more complicated story than it sounds.
Yes, but I've given you a lot of examples of how, like, this is the thing. I'm trying to give you examples where we show somebody was conscious and then they're not anymore, and what happened to their body to cause
with
that.
What happened with one variable set, like neurons firing, but there's gajillions of things happening in their body at various levels. There's electrical levels, there's cellular levels, there's so many things happening in a body that it isn't just neurons. And I know you're not saying it's just neurons, but I'm saying that's one dimension of something that's happening.
Yes, sure, okay.
I mean, there's like atomic. It goes lower than that. It goes bigger than that. There's skin.
Yeah. But that's why I was saying energy. It's information traveled. Which,
I understand.
And it is
but a computer
energy,
to
right?
me, you can look at sort of what's happening there, and there's information. I guess
we haven't met.
Is it information?
But this
there's
isn't.
voltages
No, this
traveling.
Yes. But we haven't reached, even with our supercomputers, we haven't reached the convolution levels of the human brain yet, in terms of the interconnectivity of the human brain.
Some people might argue with you about that. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know who to believe.
We have 86 billion neurons, and we have many more connections of those.
Right.
And that's the point.
But like AI people I talk to say that computers can deal with like almost infinitely more signals per second than the human brain can at this point. So maybe there's more points of connection in a human brain.
That's basically what I'm getting at. Yes.
The speed is much faster in a simple computer, and in a supercomputer way faster.
Well, yeah, but it's a more determined path, right? When we're talking about the silicon chip, and it is less convoluted, and that's the point. Is there's this? That's why I keep making this point about interconnectivity, right? And distance traveled. That's another sort of big difference, I think, is sort of the distance that information is traveling to get to whatever point that it needs to get to.
Right.
I'll need to go back and read. I don't have the exact stats on like what the most what the quickest supercomputer, or what the quickest silicon chip is, how many connections it has, how many transistors it has. Right. But each of these transistors, from my understanding, is still in a plane, whereas we've got just much more three-dimensionality to the brain.
Right.
And it's all bundled in hyper compact, and and I just still think that is sort of the thing.
Right.
That, and this is why I won't talk about my research, but this is why I've honed in on the connections of neurons for my personal research,
Right.
because I feel so strongly about this point. But fair enough. I'm also maybe just looking at everything as a hammer or as a nail or whatever, So,
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a human, to me, is a system of a whole lot of things.
Yes.
And the electrical system is part of it, in the same way that a house has water and electricity and internet and all these things.
But this is where I think that you don't maybe know enough about physiology, because it's like the electrical system is running all the other cells too.
Well, the electrical system is also running the internet to the house too, which then has its own system that's run off electricity.
Yes, but each cell is maintaining a membrane potential, which is basically it's pumping out, pumping in sodium ions and pumping out potassium ions.
Right.
To maintain an electrical potential to do work. And so that's the point, is electricity, energy is running all the cells in the same sense. And
I guess
so
maybe I'm wrong. My guess is that there is no amount of physiology that I could study that would lead me to feeling as if physiology and seeming are one derives from the other. Not that it isn't possible to me. What you're saying is very possible.
I guess why? Yeah, because you're not the only one that feels this way. So I do need to sort of understand this idea more, because I think it's actually what most people think. Like, you're saying no amount, and it's like, I think that's a pretty radical statement.
Maybe I'm wrong. And like what I was just saying, I think what you're saying is possibly true. It's not like I'm rejecting it out of hand. It's that, to me, seeming, Sam Harris talks about this too, but I remember I used to listen to him when he talked, like it is like something to be a bat is an example he uses, which is different than what it's like to be a human. And that
Yes. But our difference is the connectivity.
Well, that's not the only difference. There's a lot of differences between.
There's a lot of difference, but if we want to talk about being a bat versus being a human, and you look at, again, physiologically, what's the difference in the nervous system?
Right, but what about being a bat versus a badger? Like, how different is it? Is it really just like the difference between a bat and a badger is just that a bat has 10 connectors and a badger has 8 or something like that? I just made up numbers, but.
Yeah, well, maybe, but it also might not be that different too, because I would say that there's not as much probably awareness in a bat and a badger as there are in us. And also then we could talk about all the similarities, like they're all eukaryotic cells, they're mammals.
Right.
They all, have a general sort of skeletal structure that's pretty similar, right? It's like, this is the thing where it's just, I wonder then too, if some of the beliefs aren't out of ignorance too, and you just don't know enough about the similarities that underpin all of biology. And then how the human is different, it does seem to be this is the one thing, because there was all these theories about like, why do we have consciousness? People went to the frontal lobe and everything, and then, but even that doesn't exactly explain it. And it seems to be the big difference is in the interconnectivity, and more specifically in the dendritic spines, which I haven't talked about, and I don't have to, but those are the ultimate connections that the axonal boutons are making on the dendrites, which are these little membranous protrusions off of the dendrites or the dendritic spines.
I think,
and we have tons of them. We have tons of them.
I hear it.
Okay. Go read about it. Don't just hear it.
No. But like, I'm sure that I can read about all the cool, it's just like we have a million bazillion times more than any other animal, and I still don't see consciousness.
In the animals?
No, I still don't see how that is the source of consciousness.
Yeah, I guess we'll find out if we are able to make consciousness out of AI, right? Because I think that if we do, it's going to be this threshold of interconnectivity, and maybe you could argue
I don't
that
think
that's
we'll
what
even know.
Exactly. I would argue that maybe the internet is actually the thing that's most likely to reach that, right? Because it's
it
just
could
a network.
be there already. If it
exactly.
But this is what I'm saying is, I don't think this is going to be an answerable thing, and I think
I think it's more answerable by the evidence that I've given you, though, of the, I guess you could call it the negation evidence. Is like or the pathology evidence is like what happens when something goes wrong in the system. What do we observe? Mm-hmm. And that's why I keep going back to the neurological examples of Wernicke-Korsakoff, Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera. You know, all of these are pathologies of the brain,
right?
And one thing that keeps them all similar is that you have degradations of the neurons, but also ultimately the connections, right?
Right.
And yeah. Anyway, though, I've been repeating this. I'm gonna come off as a dick, but
I don't think you're coming off as a dick.
No,
I think
I am,
you know about this stuff, and I don't. That's
and I'm being aggressive about it just because I don't know why. I shouldn't be this aggressive.
No.
I feel like I am. Because I was saying, go read about it. It's like, you don't have to read about it. But I guess I'm just frustrated because I feel like I keep giving you examples, and then you're just like, well, I don't believe it. And I'm like, well, then, okay. It's like, well, what can I do? I think that's where my frustration ends.
But that's what I was saying. I don't actually know if there's... It's similar to a conversation that I saw. It was like some atheist, like... Richard Dawkins or something. And somebody asked him what evidence would be required of you to believe in God. And he said he actually didn't know. Because even if, God came down from the sky and talked to him, the first thing he would think is he was hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm in a situation that's similar to that, where I don't... Like the scaling of it is not where I'm having a problem. It's not that I think that we're like too close to bats. It's that it could be any number more than bats, and I'm still not feeling as if that is the source of consciousness, but I think I could be wrong from what you're saying.
Yeah, well, I see what you're saying. Because ultimately, I think what you're saying is that it is a difficult thing to prove. We haven't even proved consciousness exists in some sense, other than what we ourselves feel like exists.
Right. So, like the fact that it feels like something to me is the closest proof.
Right. Right. And that's the thing is like, I don't actually know you're conscious in the same way you don't actually know I'm conscious. Right. No, it's true, but it's true. Just like we don't know the bat's conscious, etc.
Right.
But we can look at these patterns. And so maybe that's the point. So it's true. I do cede to you that it's like, I don't think I'll ever be able to convince you 100%. But I guess what I'm trying to do with these talks is get people to realize that there are very strong indications that it's physiologic. It could be explained physiologically. And I've given a bunch of examples, and I'll continue to give examples. And I also don't think that I don't think this proves determinism either. And I hope to sort of make a better argument for this. But it's the same way. It's like, realizing in me, if like, with dopamine, right, of how sort of controlled I am by dopamine. If you become addicted to something and then you stop it right away, that feeling that you have is the dopamine just dump. It's like you're no longer making the same amount of dopamine that you were, and your body got used to it, and then all of a sudden you don't have it. And for some people that makes them feel like they have no control, but for me, I was like, that's very explainable. Now I understand. Now it's like if I feel like really depressed, I know that it will just be a matter of time before I stop feeling that way, because I'll slowly re-equilibrate the dopaminergic system. And it's kind of the same thing with consciousness, where it's like, I know that if I am what I eat and I am what I repeat, and that's going to create my mind, then I know that if I don't repeat certain things, if I acknowledge things, but I don't sort of repeat them and make them substrates of my mentations, then I'll be okay. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, anyway. God. Well, we were talking about Reddit, and yeah. I feel like we agree. It'll be interesting what you post
We
for
did
this.
it.
I don't know.
We agree.
I don't know what to call this episode. Maybe like
think-
we
I
solved
think
the
we
Middle
agree.
East. We agree. Should it be Abraham, Muhammad, and Jesus agree?
Yeah, probably. That's a good one. I like it.
Yeah, you like that?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. We did it.
Sweet.
All right.
I think so
Goodbye.
too. See ya.